Look, have you ever said something completely calm, completely reasonable, and the room just shifted? Not loudly, not dramatically, just something felt off. Maybe the other person got quieter, maybe their eyes changed a little, maybe the conversation suddenly felt tense, even though you didn't raise your voice or push anything. You were just being logical, clear, direct, and somehow that became a problem. Here's the thing. People don't always react to logic itself, they react to what it threatens inside them. Sometimes logic touches a story they've been protecting for a long time, about who's right, who's in control, who gets to define reality. And when that happens, the logic isn't heard as clarity anymore. It starts feeling like pressure, like exposure, like danger, not openly, quietly. That's where the real shift begins. Because most of the time, nobody says, "You're threatening me." They don't need to. Their body does it for them. The pause before they respond, the way their tone tightens, the way the conversation suddenly feels colder, shorter, more guarded. You might even start questioning yourself. Did I say that wrong? Was I too blunt? Maybe I should have softened it. And sure, sometimes delivery matters, but a lot of the time, what you're sensing isn't about tone at all. It's about the moment someone realizes the story they've been living in just cracked a little. Most people carry an internal narrative about who they are, the competent one, the reasonable one, the victim, the leader, the one who's always right. It's not something they consciously repeat to themselves. It's just there, running quietly in the background. And when logic lands in a way that challenges that story, it can feel surprisingly personal. You see this in small moments. A coworker calmly explains why a plan won't work, and instead of engaging with the idea, someone takes it as criticism. A partner gently points out a pattern in an argument, and suddenly the room feels emotionally heavier, tighter, less safe. Even among friends, a simple boundary can feel like rejection to the wrong nervous system. Nobody planned for it to go sideways, but it does. And if you've been on the receiving end of that shift, you know the feeling. The air changes. The connection thins. The warmth drains out of the room, just a little. You didn't attack. You didn't escalate. You just told the truth as you saw it. And somehow, that truth became a threat. A lot of people assume power struggles are loud, big fights, raised voices, obvious dominance games. But often, the real shifts happen quietly. In micro moments, in what doesn't get said anymore, in how someone starts pulling back instead of leaning in. Sometimes you notice it later, a delayed reply, less eye contact, shorter answers, a subtle distance that wasn't there before, and you start wondering, what changed? What changed is perception. When someone feels internally exposed, their nervous system doesn't ask, "Is this person logical?" It asks, "Am I safe?" And safety isn't always rational. It's emotional, identity-based, protective. If logic highlights a contradiction someone wasn't ready to face, it can feel like an attack on their self-image. Not because you intended harm, but because discomfort sometimes gets translated as danger. So instead of hearing the logic, the mind reframes the situation. You're being aggressive. You're trying to control me. You're making me look bad. You crossed a line. And once that frame settles in, everything you say afterward gets filtered through it. You might notice they stop asking questions, or stop sharing openly, or start resisting in small ways. Not directly, not loudly, just disengaging, protecting their internal story. That's the quiet resistance, not confrontation, not explosion. A slow tightening of emotional distance, and here's the part people usually miss. When perception shifts like this, respect often shifts with it. Not overnight, not dramatically, gradually. Your words carry less weight. Your presence feels slightly less welcome. Your influence shrinks in subtle, invisible ways. You might feel it before you can explain it. The balance feels off. The rhythm changes. The connection isn't aligned the same way anymore. And if you're not paying attention, it's easy to blame stress, mood, timing. But often, it traces back to a moment where logic collided with someone's internal narrative, a moment where clarity quietly destabilized identity. Look, This doesn't mean logic is wrong. It doesn't mean you should shrink yourself. It just means human systems aren't purely rational. They're emotional, protective, sensitive to perceived loss of control or status. When someone feels like their position or identity is being questioned, the reaction isn't always debate. Sometimes it's withdrawal, distance, reframing the other person as unsafe. You'll notice this especially in spaces where power is subtle: teams, friendships, relationships where influence is negotiated quietly, not formally. Small shifts in who leads conversations, whose ideas land, whose perspective feels central. When logic disrupts that balance, it can feel like someone is losing ground, even if nothing visible changed. And most of the time, this isn't conscious. No one is sitting there planning emotional defense strategies. It's automatic, a nervous system protecting a story. That's why these moments feel confusing. You didn't push, you didn't dominate, you didn't escalate. You just spoke clearly, and the dynamic still shifted. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you crossed an invisible line, you've felt this mechanism. Maybe you tried to fix it, explained yourself more, softened your tone, clarified your intent. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it makes it worse, because once someone frames you as pressure, more explanation can feel like more pressure. So the resistance deepens quietly. This is where awareness starts to matter. Not to manipulate, not to control, just to see what's actually happening beneath the surface. You stop personalizing the wrong layer of the reaction. You stop assuming something is fundamentally broken. You start recognizing the invisible dynamics at play. And once you see this pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. Meetings, conversations, small moments that suddenly feel heavy for no obvious reason. You can't really unsee it. And here's something interesting. When you stop reacting emotionally to these shifts, they often soften on their own. Not always, but often. Because calm presence doesn't feed the threat loop the same way defensiveness does. You stay steady, you stay grounded, you don't chase the shift. And that steadiness subtly rebalances the dynamic. Still, this raises a deeper question. If logic can quietly become a perceived threat, what does that mean for how respect erodes over time? How many relationships lose balance not through conflict, but through accumulated micro-shifts in perception? How often does authority dissolve not through confrontation, but through emotional withdrawal? That's where this really leads. Because once logic starts feeling dangerous to someone, the relationship stops being just about truth. It becomes about power, perception, whose internal story gets to survive. And once that invisible line is crossed, the next shifts follow their own rules, quietly, relentlessly, almost unnoticed, until it's already changed everything.